welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, as always, and we have a returning guest here this week. We have Ryan Cagle from Paradox Press back again. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Well, you put another game out, so we had you on back in January to talk about your game Defragmentation, which people can go back in the archives and have a listen to. But your latest game, Gloom, Tarot and Terror, looks really interesting. So I reached out again, wanted to have you back on the show to come and talk about it. And it was perfect timing because it's Halloween, so people are wanting to play some horror games. And this really jumped out at me because it's more of a minimalist game. So it feels something really approachable to just pick up and try out with your friends over spooky season. So we'll dive into this and talk about that. But usually, as people that know the show, listen to the show, and you, Ryan, as a guest on the show previously know, I usually ask about your history and background with RPGs, but we already kind of covered that ground in January. So I thought instead we could talk about how your year in gaming has been. So since you were with us in January, now we're in October, do you have any particular gaming highlights, any games that you've been playing or mechanics you've been particularly liking?
Yeah, I guess at this point, I still have been playing mostly solo games.
Okay.
And the most, typically, I just find like the most obscure games on itch or that, just that are come up that are solo that I can play. I'm a big fan of those. And so there's a bunch of solo games I've been playing. But group games, alongside Paradox Press, I have another company, it's not the right word for it, another project called Roll for Spirituality. And so basically it uses tabletop games kind of as a medium for self-discovery, healing, introspection, those kind of things. And so I just finished up a huge grant project for it where I worked with several groups. And so we used the game Dream Chaser. So if you're not familiar with Dream Chaser, it's just such a wonderful system and it's perfect for that kind of work, but it's really just perfect for any kind of gaming. So played a bunch of or led a bunch of people in playing, as a GM with Dream Chaser, and it's a system that I just love. It's super fun. It's flexible in a way that I don't think any other tabletop RPG that I've played is. So I like the ability to really give players agency and the ability to kind of have some storytelling power and things like that. And a lot of that happens in Dream Chaser. And I hope some of that kind of bleeds over as well into Gloom and my other projects. I'm very much not a typical, DM is kind of like ruling power over everything. Like we talked about before the last time I was here, I cut my teeth on D&D 3.5, but I've definitely, I think the older I get, the more games I play, the more I like being able to be a part of like communal and collective storytelling together. So.
Fab. And that's definitely, I think, what you can see in Gloom with the influence there. So to give people, it's, one thing I should say is it's live on Kickstarter right now. So and it's actually ending tomorrow. So if you're watching or listening this, it ends on the 24th of October. So if at all interested, go check it out. Time's of the essence of this one. But yes, could you give people an overview of what the game is? So what is Gloom, Tarot and Terror?
Yeah, so Gloom is really a minimalist horror tabletop role-playing game. It's something that actually is kind of the fourth or fifth iteration almost kind of in the design, because it was originally designed as a part of, like, when I first started designing games, I challenged myself to design a single page minimalist game, could be front or back, a month for a whole year. And so I did that a few years ago, and this game, the earliest version of this game got picked up as a part of the Longtail Games Tiny Tome project that released. I think it was last year, it might have been the year before that, where they basically did a whole jam on itch, and people submitted games, and 50 of those games got bundled together and published in a book through Longtail Games. And so Gloom was, I entered in a couple of those one-page games that I had worked on, and Gloom was one of the ones that got picked for that. And so nice. I really loved it. I really loved it as a one-page game, but I really wanted to find a way to expand it and lean more into those themes and the things that kind of had wasn't as deeply developed as I wanted. And so I began probably sometime last year working on it again and thinking through like what this would look like. And I'm really interested in weird and strange games, like thematically and mechanically, but also in like delivery. The
Mm-hmm.
defragmentation, that the last game I was on here to talk about, it's a solo game, but it's card based, so it's all these cards or whatever, and everything's in a tuck box with all the rules in the tuck box and those kind of things. And so I was thinking about, like, with Gloom, tarot cards kind of take place is the thing that drives the narrative, but also player actions, whether they succeed or fail. And so I got to thinking about what would it mean to just package this game as a tarot deck. And so that's kind of how that idea came along. But Gloom is really meant, like we talked about, telling collective stories. It's designed to kind of help players weave together the compelling stories of suspense and tension. It's really influenced by, the kind of boys on bikes or kids on bikes genre of movies from the 80s and 90s, and all of those kind of things. Growing up in the rural South, we have all kinds of folklore and things, about the woods and those kind of things. And so that was definitely a big influence of, like, what it means to be, like, those childhood imaginations as a kid of, like, fighting great evils in small isolated communities, whether they're ancient or new, and we've seen obviously, I think, a cultural resurgence in some of those themes, like with Stranger Things and stuff like that. We've kind of put those stories back in their current cultural space. And so Gloom is open enough to allow, like, a lot of creative agency within the players, who can be played with a GM or without a GM. But the biggest thing is that it's really functions more as kind of a broad setting and genre for player experience, and it relies really heavily on the aesthetics of experience playing the game. The part of the game is that you should play in the dark with just a handful of candles, and those candles slowly throughout the game become extinguished, and if they all become extinguished before kind of the end resolution, then basically everyone loses. But again, it's really not a win or lose thing, more as it is about telling a really good, compelling story. So
so I find it interesting mechanically that the items you need to play the game is obviously like a pen and paper, maybe tarot deck of cards, candles. Is there anything else we need to sit down and play the game?
The only other thing, other than candles, pen and paper, and the deck, is a coin. Where there's a couple times throughout the game where you're prompted, where decisions have to be made, or either ors kind of come up, and so a coin helps with that. But that's the closest thing to a die in the game, is that coin. So I guess you could definitely technically say a D2 of some sorts, but all the other mechanics happen through drawing cards. So if a player wants to take an action where it would be uncertain or a difficult or unlikely positive outcome, then the player has to draw a card. And if there's, if a GM might decide you need to draw 3 cards to successfully do this. And the problem with, or the difficulty in that, is that there's not an immediate fail situation, like if you're rolling a D20 and roll a 1. But the thing is that with every card that's taken out of the deck, the closer you get to this evil winning, essentially. Because that the deck, when there's no more cards to draw, or there's no more candles lit, then the game's over. And another thing about the tarot deck is that all the major arcana have particular narrative hooks or actions that they trigger throughout the game. So a card may kill a character if it's drawn. A card may put it up to a coin flip. A card may, be give a benefit later on in the game if it's held on to, or and those kind of things. And so there's a set of prompts within those major arcana cards that help move the narrative forward and cause tension and those kind of things as well.
Okay. So we're a group of young people in a small town. Big evil stuff's happening. We need to figure out, kids on bikes, for whatever reason, we can't tell the adults. It sounds like death is a real possibility. How does the game deal with character death?
Yeah, so one of the things I think I hate about tabletop RPGs is character death. I've been there. I've been, playing those early games with, a cruel DM, and have a character die that I like spend a lot of time on, and then it's just over, and then you roll a new character, start over. Or maybe if you're in the part of a campaign where that's not possible, or a session, so you might get to pick up the next session or something like that. And so when playing through this, and I really wanted it to be accessible, and I wanted it to be where people didn't just die and they're out. And I would say, like, broadly, there's a lot of influence on Gloom from games like Dread.
Yeah.
But one of the things that happened, I think, when I used to run Dread back in the day was that when people would die, they're just, okay, what do I do now? Like, just
Yeah.
sit here and wait, or whatever,
Yeah.
until y'all
Fun.
get through. And yeah, and so with a Jenga tower, death can happen like really quick, right? Like a block tower, because you could knock it over really easily. And so there's a pretty high chance of death early on in Gloom. And so one way I wanted to kind of reimagine or reapproach that, and the rules are, if you wanted to just completely play a new character or take over an NPC, you could, if that's something that someone would prefer in the story. But one of the ways that I wanted to kind of keep dead players involved, or dead player characters involved, was to allow them to continue to exist in a different format. So they can no longer draw cards, but there's particular actions that they can perform. And so, maybe if your story is like actually more supernatural, that character becomes a ghost, right? Maybe that's what narratively makes sense in a world. If you're whatever this evil is, maybe that. But then there's other contexts where maybe this evil is more alien, and so maybe this person loses their corporeality. They lose their body. They die physically, but there's some way for their mind to continue on. One of the things that came up in one of the early tests was like this character got to kind of like get, their body was gone, but their consciousness lived within the group. Like there was this event that happened dealing with this more kind of alien interdimensional creature, and they lost their body, but their mind existed, but only when the group was together. And so this character got to continue to play narratively, be a part of the conversation, be a part of trying to find solutions, even though they couldn't draw cards anymore. They still got to participate in the narrative. But then there's also key things that like dead player characters can do. They can there's times when they can add cards from the discard pile back into the deck and those kind of things.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, that sounds cool. So there's a way for the character or the player, more importantly, like you say, to stay involved and be part of the story, but there are some mechanical consequences of death. So it still means something and has an impact, but it doesn't mean go away, we're done playing the game now.
Right.
That's good to hear. So with the game, it sounds like it's kind of really open tool set that you could tell a variety of different stories. Like you say, some people have gone for the aliens, some have gone for like esoteric old horror in the woods. So you could do lots of things. How do you create the town and what the threat is and the characters?
Yeah, and so thank you for asking that, because the tarot is not just a mechanical aspect of like moving the story along. The tarot, the whole point of tarot is, or not the whole point, but one of the things that's very useful about tarot is the ability to be able to interpret these cards. And so, generally when cards are pulled during the game, mechanically, those cards, what they are, have significance, and they can be interpreted like in relation to the story that's unfolding. But kind of in the pre-setup of the game, the first phase of the game is that you're basically creating your characters, the town, and the threat with the tarot cards. And so there's kind of a series of prompts where you will draw tarot cards and lay them out in a spread to determine and answer questions based on card positionings in this tarot spread about the town, and you collectively kind of answer those together. And then the same thing kind of happens for the threat as well, is that you reshuffle the deck, you lay out a tarot spread for the threat, and you answer these questions based on this spread for it to develop the sense of what this threat is. And so there's a lot of like collective imagining. So the town gets built collectively through the tarot as the group does it. The threat gets created that way, and then individual characters get created through the tarot as well. And then one of the things that's also crucial about tarot, or the character creation for me, was that trying to create a sense of connectedness. And so you can draw the tarot cards and you get to interpret, for your character, but then your relationship is determined to the character beside you is determined by the person to your right. And so they get to define how your characters are connected. And obviously there's like consent, if someone says, something just totally ridiculous that, you can veto that or whatever, but it's meant to help kind of really round that out as well. But the tarot, it functions as a space for not only moving the story forward, but creating the building blocks for the story and for the narrative.
I'm really glad you mentioned that mechanic about how one person decides their character and then the next person decides the relationship, and there's some structure to that, because I sometimes find with world building, it's really helpful to have some mechanics in place to make sure one person isn't dominating the conversation, maybe not purposefully, but if you get an idea and you're running with it and you're excited, it could be very easily for the shy person at the table to find it difficult to kind of jump in. So it sounds like there is a bit of structure around that, so to prevent that from happening and maybe give quieter people the opportunity to step forward, which is always good to hear. Fab. So you talk a lot in the games about games and rituals and your kind of partly being your inspiration for choosing tarot decks instead of dice and things like that. Could you talk a little bit more about that and the importance of it in the game?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I have another project that is religiously agnostic in the sense that it's open to participants of people with all different religions and spiritualities and kind of those kind of backgrounds. Some with none, some with various particular faith commitments, and so in that work, I've just realized like the importance of like games, even before then, really, of that they just create a safe space for people to explore things about themselves in the world that they may not have the space for outside of that. And so in thinking through, a game doesn't have to be overtly spiritual or religious or those kind of things. Like, I'm not talking about like, like corny Bible stuff as a Christian. Like, I don't want to play a game about the Bible or anything like that. I want to play, games that help like me think deeply about the world and my relationship to other people, and not necessarily even overtly, but, and so one of the things is that in Gloom, the game starts because it's almost a safety mechanic, to be honest with you. The game starts and ends with a ritual, because particularly in horror games, things can be difficult, they can be hard, things can come up that are uneasy, and whether we're watching a movie or anything like that, even when it's over, sometimes we still feel that stress in our body or those feelings or the emotions that they came up with. And so within Gloom, the game begins after the creation of everything with a ritual. And the ritual is to kind of help us like say, okay, now we are in this space. We are in the world of Gloom, who we were, we've kind of faded into this place. And this is what is here. And then at the end of it, there is a ritual to kind of exit out of that space to say, you know what, like, the evil's gone. These characters were great, but they're not us. And, to give players an opportunity to kind of decompress from whatever may happen. Because, again, it is a horror game. And, we know, like, imaginations run wild. And, they still, even if it is all in our heads, we know the effects that it can have on our bodies and those kind of things. And so for me, so that's, like, why I worked in the ritual specifically to Gloom. But just broadly, games and rituals function so similarly. Like if you on an anthropological and sociological perspective, games and ritual are very similar in the way they function in our lives. They create space for where the normal kind of rules and regulations and things of reality don't exist. Whether that's soccer or D&D, or whether that is a liturgy at a church or tarot, these spaces kind of create a sacred space. A magic circle is the term that historian Johann Huizinga uses, and kind of where those normal bounds just don't exist anymore. We're in a separate space, and it's a permeable boundary, of course, but so to me, just as someone who's very interested in the way that our actions and our rituals and our commitments and our habits, and whether they're religious or not, shape who we are, this connectedness between games and rituals has just been something that was really something that interests me in my own academic work, currently in grad school and those kind of things. And so it just felt proper to fit it into Gloom, and to talk about it through Gloom, because Gloom is a horror game that uses ritual elements like tarot and candles to tell a story, to help people enter into a different space, into a different narrative. And so I just wanted to highlight that connection between ritual and gameplay, and the importance of how it can shape us and give us alternative experiences.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned the ritual helps as almost a safety mechanic to kind of bookend the story. And throughout October, we've been talking about different kind of horror tabletop RPGs, and obviously safety mechanics are always something that we bring up when dealing with horror, just to make sure everyone's playing the game that they want to be playing. But with the rituals, I also think that must really help with like setting the tone and the kind of, because horror really needs a specific kind of vibe, a tone in the room for it. It sounds like the game with the mechanics and the setup really leans into that, with starting with the ritual to bring you into the space. use the candles, if possible, to be the only lighting around you, so that creates that kind of creepy atmosphere. What other kind of guidance or advice would you give to people running the game to help create the right atmosphere for Gloom?
Yeah, I definitely think, if you wanted to get like some kind of cool playlist or to go along with it that's ambient, fitting into the story, you could go all out. I know people that do, when they play D&D and whether or play
Mm-hmm.
RPGs, no matter what it is, they do everything they can to make the space seem like it is that story or in that world. And so you can do
Mm-hmm.
that, but you don't really have to so much go over the top, I think, with Gloom, because the idea is that through the game there's going to be a decreased amount of light available, so it already aesthetically kind of functions as kind of closing in and shortening and dimming, the potential for success or winning,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, in Gloom. One of the things that I love most about the ritual is the opening ritual is that it starts completely in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
So when everybody's ready, you turn off the lights and you functionally sit there until someone's uncomfortable or until you begin to feel kind of uneasy that you're sitting in the quiet with a bunch of people in the dark. And then when that feeling, happens, then you begin to, every player begins to, or, one player lights a light and they hand the lighter to someone else, and then until everything's illuminated. And so you start off kind of in the darkness in without seeing anything to being able to have the light again, and then through the game it fades out. And so I think aesthetically, like, it's already there. A playlist, I'm sure, would be great.
Mm-hmm.
If you can, ambient music, if you're playing whatever kind of game you're playing, there's 1,000, things out there that are already like pretty made up for those, setting those kind of moods or whatever. But I definitely I prefer the silence and just letting the dark do the crux
Mm-hmm.
of holding up that kind of aesthetic feeling for Gloom. But yeah, there's definitely opportunities there to expand that and kind of help cultivate that even more, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I sometimes think giving a little bit of information or allowing silence is more scary, because generally players' imaginations will think of something far more scary than you could ever say to them out loud. So yes, I think giving space for silence is a really good point on that for this game, and almost transfer to any other horror game that you're running or playing in. That sounds really great. I've come to a lot at the end of my sort of questions, about the game. So if people are interested after hearing about it, could you tell us about the Kickstarter and what sort of things, how people can get involved and support the game?
Yeah, so there's this Kickstarter is a lot different than some of my previous ones,
Okay.
in that I would say for the most part the price tag's a little higher because producing tarot cards is not cheap.
Mm-hmm.
78 deck of cards, and so yeah, if you can come on, if you can share, if you can just talk, if you're talking about, if you're interested back, obviously. The reward tiers are pretty straightforward. There's a digital reward of just the rules. There's a print reward of just the standard Gloom
Mm-hmm.
tarot deck, which is 78 cards that are like
Mm-hmm.
slightly altered, kind of more traditional tarot art, that comes with like the 32 page rule book, all kind of packaged in the box. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
an expanded edition that has a tarot, or has an oracle deck, which offers 22 additional cards. And this oracle deck could be used just like any standard oracle deck, like in the sense of like for reflection or however anyone would in their own kind of practice. But it also comes with supplemental rules for Gloom, to be added into that. And so, which I really love. Originally, the Bright Oracle expansion for Gloom was originally kind of just an Oracle deck I had designed for my own kind of spiritual practice. And then I
Mm-hmm.
developed some alternative like magic system for like just pull this into whatever game you're playing for like a magic
Mm-hmm.
system or a magic user. But then when I started reworking on Gloom, I really wanted to pull it in and make it a part of it. And so there's some alternative rules that really expand the way players interact or can interact or have kind of have some say over each other in the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
with the Oracle deck. So yeah, those are the three kind of reward tiers, reward levels. There's no stretch goals because I do not believe in stretch goals or what I like to call stress goals. And I just don't. I put a lot of work and a lot of time into the game, and I feel like it is
Yeah.
good. And I could have framed some of the things probably as stretch goals that are already there, but I just want it to be what it is, and people who are interested in it can participate and back it and share it and those kind of things. For what you see is what you get, kind of thing.
Yeah, I believe that sentiment a lot. We're known at EM Publishing that we don't do stretch goals very often, hardly ever, for that exact reason. We're like, well, we've got it here. It's here for you to use it, and this is kind of what it is. Especially because we, which sounds similar to you, have done most of the development in advance of the Kickstarter going live. So a lot of those decisions kind of have been made and things like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So yeah, so the Kickstarter, the link is on the page if you're watching live, and in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. So check that out, because it is about 24 hours left from posting this going out there. But Ryan, if people are interested in some of the other games that you mentioned that you're working on, other projects, where's the best place for them online to check that out and find out more?
Yeah, you could go to paradoxpress.games, which mostly links to our itch.io account, which has all of our digital games, our backlog of like 20 games of varied genre and format and mechanics. Very few of them are even remotely similar in how they function. But so we might have something for you, whether you like OSR stuff or you like weird solo games. There, several of our print games are available out there. We, By the Light of the Broken Moon, which is a solo game we developed, is print and published by Exalted Funeral. Kind of our magnum opus, our biggest game to date, is Project Terminus, and it is available through +1exp.com. And so, but those are the two places you can go to get those games if you need physicals of anything. But otherwise, just if you go to paradoxpress.games, you'll find all of the things, all the information you need.
Fab, that's great. Thanks so much for coming on, Ryan, and all the best for the Kickstarter. I'm a backer, so I'm excited to see it come to fruition. But as always, I ask you if you have any recommendations for any other indie tabletop RPGs, and as always, the rules are it can't be D&D, and it can't be a game that you've made.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, trying to come up to get ready, and I was thinking that I was going to recommend Dream Chaser, which I don't know I recommended the last time I was here, but I've just spent so much time with it. A game, a solo game. I was trying to think of like, I play a lot of solo games, and it's just like there's a lot. But I stumbled upon it. It's a solo game called Annihilation, a post-Doomsday solo RPG. I think
I've
it is
heard of
by
this.
Jason Burrows is the designer. Aesthetically, it's like it's my kind of jam, and it's really fun. Kind of very different from the solo games that I usually play, because I tend to play more like solo journaling kind of games and those kind of things. But yeah, it's called Annihilation, so like an annihilation but without the A. And the description is: a foretelling of doomsday has come to pass. All that remains are fading memories. The lingering shadowlands will soon also cease to be. You find yourself amidst a crumbling reality, without a past but not without hope, caught between the world that was and the stars that remain. And it's a really, really cool game, really cool concept, and just like I said, as far as the artwork and the whole aesthetic of it, incredibly pleasing. So yeah, do definitely go check it out. And then I was trying to think. I didn't want to recommend a game again that I recommended last time, and I don't remember if I said this, but the other non kind of group game I've played more often than not this last year is a game called Signal to Noise. And it's a 2-player kind of letter writing game about two people who, like, one's basically on Earth, one's leaving on a ship for another planet, and you're writing letters to each other. And as the game progresses, the letters become more scrambled as the distance is there. And so it's a really interesting concept. I'm really interested in kind of like not solo, but solo games, because you play Signal to Noise on your own, and then you send a letter, and then that person plays and sends a letter back.
The asynchronous play sort of style,
yeah. So I really like that kind of mechanical style. So those are a purely solo game and kind of an asynchronous co-op game for you. Annihilation and Signal to Noise.
those are two great recommendations. Thank you very much. I'm getting into solo games at the moment, so I might have to check them out and give them a play myself. So thank you. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show again. We'll be happy to have you back another time. So maybe next year when you're doing another project, get in touch, let us know. And thank you to everybody who watched and listened. We'll be back next week with more horror TTRPGs for you to check out. Thank you very much, folks. Bye.